I didn't find out until after we got engaged that Ethan Sullivan had an incredibly capable secretary. He brought her to every dinner party and banquet. Said he didn't want me to get tired. At the gala, everyone praised what a perfect match they were. Born for each other. Ethan just smiled and said nothing. I stood awkwardly in the corner, clutching my thermos, completely at a loss, until a voice sounded behind me. Lazy and unruly. Bad men deserve to be dumped. So why don't you give me a chance instead? I didn't know until I walked into the hall that Ethan's company was throwing a banquet tonight. It was to celebrate the successful launch of their new product, and many industry elites had been invited. Ava Bennett was wearing a stunning custom gown. Her arm linked confidently through Ethan's. They looked impossibly harmonious and beautiful together. Praise poured in from all sides. Mr. Sullivan is so mature and steady, and his fiancée is so gentle and lovely. They really are a match made in heaven. As they spoke, Ava placed her hand over Ethan's as he lifted his wine glass. Her voice was soft and intoxicating. Ethan, your stomach isn't well. You shouldn't drink too much. Mr. Sullivan is so lucky to have such a wonderful wife by his side. You must invite us to your wedding. Ethan just kept smiling and saying nothing, as if he'd completely forgotten that the woman who'd stood beside him at their engagement banquet 2 months ago was me. The banquet hall was alive with the rustle of silk and the clink of glasses. Compared to the glamorous people inside, I stayed outside in a plain dress. My hair tied back simply with a silk ribbon. I'd rushed over so quickly I hadn't even had time to put on makeup. I looked disheveled and out of place, like a beggar who'd wandered into a palace. The only thing of value I had on me was the engagement ring on my finger, and by some cruel coincidence, Ava, the Mrs. Sullivan everyone was fawning over, was wearing an identical diamond ring. 2 women stepped out to use the restroom, passing right by me. Mr. Sullivan is so mature and steady. Even if he seems a little cold, he looks like the kind of man who'd treat his wife really well. I heard he personally picked out his fiancée's dress for tonight. Ugh. I'm so jealous. I couldn't help but glance down at my phone. So Ethan's working late text had actually been about picking out a dress with Ava. That's why he didn't have time to come take wedding photos with me. I'd sat alone in the bridal salon, staring out the window again and again, and been disappointed again and again. I couldn't reach Ethan, and under the shop assistant's awkward stares, I'd had to leave in embarrassment. It wasn't until I got home that I'd received his text saying he was working overtime. I hugged the thermos tighter to my chest. The cold from its metal surface seeped through my clothes and into my skin. When I got back to the Moore house alone, I was greeted by my mother's sharp scolding. Lila Moore, you're such a blockhead, wasting that pretty face of yours. Men need to be coddled. You know that. Do you have any idea how much effort we put into getting you this match with the Sullivans? I pressed my lips together and stared at my shoes. She was right. Actually, among all the blind dates, the other women were all wealthy and beautiful, but Ethan had chosen me. Once, when things were good, I'd even worked up the courage to ask him why. He'd sipped his red wine and smiled softly. The first time I saw you, you pricked your finger with a needle. The way you sucked the blood off your finger, it made my heart ache. In that romantic French restaurant, the light was soft and intimate. My face had turned redder than the wine in my glass. I've always been a quiet person, not good at charming men, but if it was Ethan, I was willing to try. Ever since we'd met, he'd always taken such good care of me. I have poor circulation, and my hands and feet are always cold. Ethan made sure his driver always kept hand warmers in the car. I love embroidery, even though my family thinks it's a waste of time. He bought me this riverside villa, filled with all the embroidery supplies I could ever want. I never really fit in at the Moore house. Their love and affection for me was always only skin deep. But after I started dating Ethan, he came home with me every month. He'd cancel even the most urgent meetings just to be there. He'd always make sure to serve me my favorite mushroom tofu at dinner. And every time my mother would simper and say, "Lila's such a handful. I'm sorry she's always bothering you." Ethan would take my ice-cold hand and hold it openly on the table for everyone to see. 1,000 little bubbles of happiness would rise up in my chest, and I'd squeeze his hand back softly, telling him without words that I loved him. Dinners at home would drag on, and the food would get cold. but my heart was always warm. Not like now. The porridge was still piping hot, but my heart was slowly turning cold. I'd heard Ethan was working late, and I was worried he'd get a stomachache. So I'd rushed to make him this porridge. Now I knew. It was all for nothing. The blister on my hand from burning myself while cooking throbbed painfully. I tilted my head back and blinked hard, forcing back the tears. A messenger came out of the banquet hall. He looked at me with undisguised contempt. Secretary Ava said you're not appropriate for this occasion. None of Ethan's colleagues or friends even knew who I was. Even our engagement had just been a quiet dinner with him. I ate family. Ethan's excuse had been, I don't want our private life to be public. My mother's complaints had been silenced before they even started by the exorbitant bride price Ethan had offered. But everyone knew Ava, Ethan's childhood friend and personal secretary, the woman who meant more to him than anyone else. Once, someone had made a rude comment about Ava at a dinner, and Ethan had smashed a wine bottle over their head in a rage. When the news of Ethan's engagement broke, most people had assumed it was to Ava. Having a fiancé who was so close to another woman, it was like a thin nail being driven slowly into my heart. The pain never went away. I'd hinted to Ethan a few times, asked if I could accompany him to banquets. He'd wrapped his arm around my shoulders then, his cool lips brushing my ear in a tender kiss. Let Ava handle these things. I don't want you to get tired. Now I finally understood. It wasn't that he was being considerate. It was that I wasn't good enough to be seen with him. I pulled my lips into a bitter, self-deprecating smile. The man in front of me looked at my plain clothes and downcast expression with even more disdain. No trespassing for unauthorized personnel. If you don't leave right now, I'll call security. I looked up at him, my voice flat. That Chanel earring you're wearing is so fake it's embarrassing. I threw the thermos into a trash can around the corner, and with it, I threw away this one-year relationship. In a quiet corner away from the crowd, I leaned against the cold tile wall. The emotions I'd been holding back for so long finally broke free. I cried silently, my shoulders shaking. Tears fell one by one onto the floor at my feet. The nail that had been stuck in my heart for so long was finally pulled out. Along with the gushing blood came the excruciating pain of rusted metal tearing through flesh. But it was better than letting it fester away. When I'd calmed down a little, a voice suddenly sounded behind me, lazy, unruly, and a little teasing. Auntie, bad men deserve to be dumped. So what do you think? Am I a better option? I looked around and saw no one else. He was talking to me. I turned around, my eyes red and puffy, confused. It was Liam Carter. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. The bright lights softened his sharp features and high nose. He was smiling, his dark, almond-shaped eyes twinkling mischievously. Wow. You look like a sad frog. Really ugly. In a daze, I got into Liam's car. I never thought I'd see him again, let alone that he was Ethan's nephew. Liam rested one hand on the steering wheel, a cigarette dangling from his lips as he waited at a red light. He glanced at me, then put the cigarette back in the pack. Wow, Lila Moore, you've really come up in the world. From my little shadow to my auntie in just a few years. His teasing voice filled the car. His dark eyes were unreadable, and every time he glanced at me, there was something hidden in his gaze. But when I turned to look at him properly, he'd already put on his usual playful expression. What, cat got your tongue? I sat in the passenger seat, not knowing where to start. Back in 9th grade, there were always a few guys on motorcycles hanging around the school gate, robbing students. Hand over your money, little girl, and no one gets hurt. I clenched the money in my palm so tight my knuckles turned white. I stared at the baseball bat inches from my face. I closed my eyes, biting down hard on my lip, wishing the money would just melt into my skin. The blow I was expecting never came. Instead, I heard a loud crack, the sound of wood breaking. I opened my eyes, huddled in the corner, and saw Liam standing in front of me, radiating anger. The thugs had backed away, terrified. He pulled me to my feet like I was a little chick, his lazy voice sharp with fury. Any of you so much as touch her again, and you're dead. Those thugs were scared of Liam, and I was scared they'd come after me for revenge. So after that, every day after school, I'd follow a little way behind Liam. Not too close, not too far. After a while, It became a habit. I became his little shadow. But youth ends too quickly. Just before college entrance exams, Liam left suddenly. Before I could even feel sad about it, I was taken back by the moors and left the small town where I'd grown up. As we left, Grandma's hunched figure stood by the road, her hands calloused from decades of embroidery and silkworm tending, gripped mine tightly. Even though there were tears in her eyes, she smiled brightly. "My sweet girl. You're so kind and gentle. They'll love you there. City life is good, so much better than suffering with this old woman." Outside the car window, the city lights blurred into a colorful haze. "But Grandma, I'm not happy at all. My parents don't love me. The double-sided embroidery I spent months making, they threw it in the trash as soon as I turned my back. And my love life is a disaster. They have so much love to give to everyone else." I bit my lip, my eyes burning, and turned to look out the window. A fresh, clean scent mixed with Liam's body heat washed over me. His large black coat was draped over my head. His deep voice was soft with something that sounded like pity. "It's okay to cry. I can't see you." Liam knew I never cried in front of other people. He'd created this small, warm, dark space just for me, and the tears I'd been holding back came pouring out. When I got out of the car, my eyes were even more swollen and red. Liam didn't tease me about looking ugly this time. "Thank you for today." My voice was hoarse, like I'd been swallowing sand. Liam smiled crookedly and raised his hand to ruffle my hair, just like he used to do every time I shared my sparkling water with him. But this time, his hand stopped just before it touched my hair, and he pulled it back suddenly. Liam glanced at the house behind me, the riverside villa Ethan had given me. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he took a deep breath. The moonlight was pale and gray. He looked so sad and defeated in that moment. "Layla, do you really have to be with him?" What did you say?" His voice was so soft the wind carried it away, and I didn't hear him. Liam didn't repeat himself. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and nodded at the coat in my arms. "Ugh. The wind's freezing. I can't believe I gave you my coat." He laughed bitterly to himself. I felt terrible. It really was windy tonight. I'd planned to wash it and return it to him later, but now it looked like I had to give it back right away. "Liam, don't forget to take cold medicine when you get home. Thank you so much for tonight. If you hadn't been there, He was already walking away into the darkness. All I got in response was a vague wave of his hand. I went back to the villa and packed all my things. When I counted them up, there really wasn't much that belonged to me in this house. My flower shed, embroidery frame, threads, embroidery wax. It didn't even fill one suitcase. The bags, the jewelry, the clothes, even the priceless antique embroidery pieces he'd bought at auction. All of it was from Ethan. I went upstairs and took 2 of Ethan's shirts from the back of the closet. They'd been my birthday present to him. I'd embroidered an anthurium on each collar. It had been right when he'd take an over Sullivan group completely. I'd meant it as a wish for his success and prosperity. Ethan had smiled so happily when he'd received them. Then he'd stuffed them in the back of the closet and never worn them. But the striped tie Ava had given him, it was always hanging right by his door, easy to reach. When I left, I put the keys and the engagement ring on the table together. Before I got engaged, I'd saved up enough money from my embroidery studio to buy a small apartment of my own. It wasn't too late when I got there. I picked up my phone and called Ethan. Some things needed to be said clearly. The banquet had been a huge success, and Ethan was pleased. It had been 2 years since he'd taken over the company from his father, and he'd finally proven himself, earning the right to be called Mr. Sullivan instead of just young Mr. Sullivan. He was on top of the world. Actually, Ethan had known Lila had come to see him during the banquet. This kind of occasion, she just wouldn't fit in, even without seeing her. He could picture exactly what she looked like. A plain dress, her hair tied back simply, maybe a little makeup if she'd tried. So elegant, so beautiful, so perfectly Lila, just like the first time he'd seen her. Among all the heavily made-up women at the blind dates, she was the only one who was blushing so hard she couldn't even look him in the eye. So pure and unspoiled, he'd been attracted to her. That was true, but she just wasn't presentable enough. Lila had her own studio, making hand embroidery. Once, after a family dinner, Ethan had overheard his aunts whispering, "Embroidery artist, please. She's just a seamstress." I don't know what Ethan was thinking. Choosing her of all people, and she's so quiet, barely says a word. Ethan had fought hard in the bitter family succession battle to get where he was today, and for a moment, he'd actually regretted his impulsive decision. If he'd married someone capable and charming, she could have helped him so much. Instead of this, but at least he'd always had Ava. Ethan had known all along that Ava was pretending to be his fiancée. At first, he'd felt a little guilty about Lila, but then he'd seen how well Ava handled everything as Mrs. Sullivan. Lila could never have done that, and that tiny spark of guilt had disappeared completely. Besides, Lila seemed happier just staying home with her needles and threads anyway. Pointless stuff, really, but since she liked it, he'd buy her a few things every now and then to keep her happy. A friend had joked with him once, said he was having his cake and eating it too, and he should watch out for trouble. Ethan had downed his glass of red wine and smiled confidently. Trouble. Lila doesn't have the guts. In Ethan's eyes, Lila was as gentle as a rabbit. She'd never question him, even when she was upset. She'd never raise her voice. A few kind words and she'd forgive him. And besides, her parents were so greedy. Even if she did find out about everything, what could she possibly do? Ethan's perspective. Ethan stared at his nephew, his throbbing headache getting worse by the second. Liam was his biological nephew. He took his mother's last name, Carter, and was only a few years younger than Ethan. Ethan had never liked his older brother. The man spent all his time in the kitchen, waiting on his wife hand and foot, and he'd actually smiled and said it was only fair, since she'd gone through the pain of giving birth to their son. So Liam had grown up with his mother's family. They barely saw each other except for holidays. Tonight, Liam had burst into Ethan's hotel room without knocking. Ava was lying on the bed, her clothes half undone. The rage in Liam's eyes was terrifying, like he wanted to tear them both apart. Lamps and vases went crashing to the floor. Panicked, Ava grabbed her clothes and ran out of the room. Liam stood in the doorway, looking down at Ethan, and what he said next made Ethan's blood run cold. "Uncle Ethan, you really will sleep with anything, won't you? What do you think Grandpa will say when he finds out?" Old Mr. Sullivan was a man of strict principles, and he hated it when his grandchildren misbehaved. "Liam, it's not what you think." Ethan's excuse was cut off by the ringing of his phone. "Ethan." It was Lila. Her voice was soft and gentle, the same voice that had calmed his nerves and eased his exhaustion so many times before. "Layla, I'm a little busy right now. I'll call you back." Ethan stared at Liam, completely flustered. "Ethan, we're breaking up. Ava is much more suited to be Mrs. Sullivan than I am. I think we both know that. I left everything you gave me at the Riverside Villa. The keys are on the table. Let's end this amicably." "Ethan, I wish you all the best." The room fell silent. Only Lila's voice echoed in the air. It wasn't loud, but every word cut through the tension. Ethan didn't react until the line went dead. Lila had just broken up with him. He stared at the phone in shock, then laughed bitterly. What was this? Some kind of temper tantrum, because he hadn't let her come to the banquet tonight. She was really getting too spoiled for her own good. Fine, let her break up with him. He'd just ignore her for a few weeks, and she'd come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. Beside him, Liam's anger faded as quickly as it had come. When the call ended, he crossed his arms and laughed out loud, because of Liam's mother's powerful family. Ethan couldn't afford to make him angry. He thought carefully before speaking. "Please don't tell Grandpa about tonight. I don't want him to get upset and hurt his health." "Relax, Uncle. I don't have time for your nonsense." With that, Liam whistled and walked downstairs. "I didn't have time to wallow in my broken heart. I'd received an invitation to the Lost Heritage National Embroidery Competition. It was the first time I'd ever been invited to a national-level competition, a real recognition of my work. But after the initial excitement came the pressure. I threw myself into preparing, working day and night, designing, tracing, stretching the fabric, choosing threads. If something wasn't perfect, I'd take it all apart and start over, again and again, pushing myself to try new designs and new techniques. When Liam suddenly showed up at my door, I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion. Layla, my coat got dirty. What are you gonna do about it? He tossed the same black coat that had sheltered me that night back into my arms. I think there's snot on the collar. I turned the coat inside out, muttering under my breath as I followed him inside. There's no snot on it. You liar. Liam looked around my small apartment. Then his smile faded as he stared at me seriously. Layla Moore, are you trying to kill yourself? Working yourself to death like this? Before he could finish his sentence, the room started spinning, and my legs gave out from under me. Layla, Layla. I couldn't respond to his panicked voice. All I remember is falling into warm, strong arms, and the faint, comforting scent of his cologne. When I woke up again, it was dark outside. Liam was sitting in a chair beside my bed, his head resting on his hand. Asleep, the bedside lamp cast a soft glow over his face. He was frowning slightly, his lips turned down, looking uncomfortable. I gently touched his arm to wake him up. Liam's eyes flew open, and he automatically reached up to feel my forehead. You're awake. Want some water? He handed me a glass of lukewarm water and stuffed a pillow behind my back. Lean back. It's more comfortable. The doctor came. You have low blood sugar from not eating properly, and a slight fever. You don't need medicine yet. Thank you. My throat tightened. Besides, thank you. I didn't know what else to say. Ever since I left the small town and Grandma, no one had ever cared for me like this. For the first time in years, I felt like I was home. After that night, Liam moved into my apartment, said he was going to make sure I ate properly and got enough sleep. One day he'd bring over a few clothes, the next day his computer. Some mornings, his secretary would even drop off his work files at my door. Liam always seemed so lazy and carefree, but when he was working, he was a completely different person. He'd lean forward slightly, the sleeves of his light gray shirt rolled up to his elbows, a pen twirling between his long fingers. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting half his face in shadow. When the person on the other end of the phone finished speaking, Liam's deep voice was sharp and serious. Don't let this happen again. Send me another version before you leave today. He hung up the phone and turned another page of his document. As the paper rustled, he said without looking up, Layla, you've been staring at me for 10 minutes. I looked down quickly, my face burning, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I was just taking a break from embroidery. I'd only meant to rest my eyes for a second. How had I ended up staring at him? Don't apologize. I'm flattered I can charm you that much. My heart skipped a beat. You keep working. I'm going to go lie down for a while. Liam watched me run away, a genuine smile spreading across his face, when there was a knock on the door. I quickly hid my embroidery in the closet. Liam walked in with a dark expression, went straight to the closet, and pulled out my half-finished landscape of mountains and rivers. I hung my head in shame. With Liam living here and making me go to bed on time, I never seemed to have enough time to work. This competition was such a rare opportunity, and I didn't want to waste it. So I'd been sneaking downstairs to work after Liam fell asleep. I'd tried to hint at dinner that I was feeling better now, and he could go back to his own place. But Liam had just ignored me completely and served me another bowl of porridge. I'm just worried I won't finish in time. Liam stared at the embroidery in his hands, breathing heavily with anger. Finally, he sighed in defeat. You're so stubborn. He'd said that to me once before, back when he'd saved me from those thugs. He'd looked at the $10 I'd been clutching so tightly in my hand and laughed in disbelief. That's it, Layla Moore. Was it worth it? Liam was a rich kid from the city. He couldn't understand. That money was what Grandma had earned, stitching late into the night by the light of a dim lamp. She'd forced it into my hand that morning, telling me to buy myself a milk tea. All the other girls have one. My girl should too. The money had been damp with my sweat. I'd answered firmly, yes, it was worth it. Liam had thrown his hands up in frustration. Fine, stubborn little thing. Where do you live? I'll walk you home. In the end, I'd spent half of that $10 on 2 bottles of sparkling water. One for me, one for Liam. And under his exasperated gaze, I'd said softly, you called me stubborn a long time ago too. Liam's tone changed suddenly. Oh, you remember that? Then do you remember what I said to you this morning? He put the embroidery down and took a step towards me. My back hit the bed. There was nowhere left to run. Liam's intense gaze was fixed on me. Layla, will you let me seduce you? Or more accurately, will you be my girlfriend? The air in the room suddenly felt thick and hot. I could barely breathe. How could I not have feelings for him? He was the heir to the Carter fortune, used to a life of luxury. But he'd moved into this tiny apartment with me, made sure I ate, made sure I slept, took care of everything for me. He said the meanest things, but he was always looking out for me, always careful with my sensitive feelings. And besides, back when we were kids, walking home together in the sunset, I'd traced his back with my eyes, wondering what it would be like to be his girlfriend. But we'd been separated so suddenly. All those unspoken feelings had been buried with our youth. Liam's dark eyes were filled with nothing but me. My heart was racing so fast I thought it would burst out of my chest. Then suddenly it slowed, and I heard my own voice, clear and sure, even though it felt like it was coming from far away. Liam, you're really beautiful. Liam's gorgeous brown eyes crinkled into a smile, and then he kissed me. Layla. His deep voice was rough with desire, warm against my ear. I'm not going to give you everything all at once. If it's too easy, you'll stop appreciating me. After many attempts, I finally decided to use double-sided style silk embroidery for my piece. It's a technique where you stitch both sides of the fabric at the same time, creating two identical, perfect images. It's much more difficult than single-sided embroidery, but it's also much more impressive. I was working late in my studio when my mother called. Layla Moore, what do you think you're doing? Get home right now. Ethan's here waiting for you. I knew this day would come. I hung up the phone and sent Liam a message first. I'm working late tonight. Won't be home for dinner. Liam replied instantly. A meme of an angry dog. Then, had your fun last night? Huh? Got what you wanted and now you're ignoring me. Layla Moore, how many times have you stood me up now? I felt my face burn as I read his messages. Liam had come back from a week-long business trip last night. It was the first time we'd been apart since we started dating. I turned off my phone, taking a deep breath to calm down. Ethan hadn't taken the breakup seriously at first. He'd thought Layla was just throwing a tantrum, and she'd come around after a few days. A week passed, then 2, then a month, and Layla never called him once. Ethan had been working non-stop on a big project, pulling all-nighters for days. Ava had brought him a bowl of millet congee she'd made herself. He'd taken 2 bites and then pushed it away. It didn't taste right. A strange feeling of unease settled in his stomach, but he didn't think much of it. Then one night, after finishing a mountain of work, Ethan collapsed into his chair, exhausted, and Lila's face popped into his head. Clear as day. He couldn't get her out of his mind. There was something so calming about Lila. Just having her near him would wash away all his stress and tiredness. Ethan rubbed his temples, forced to admit it to himself. He missed Lila. He missed her warm, comforting porridge. He missed her soft voice reminding him to take care of himself. He missed just having her sit quietly beside him, even if she didn't say a word. Women needed to be chaste, right? If Lila wouldn't come to him, then he'd go to her. Ethan drove to the riverside villa, and his heart sank when he saw how empty and clean the house was. Lila was really gone. There wasn't a single trace of her left in the huge house. Ethan tried to calm his racing heart and called Lila's phone. It went straight to voicemail. His messages wouldn't send. Ethan stared at TH's spotless living room, at the small set of keys sitting on the table, and with a furious roar, he threw the keys across the room. The crystal chandelier above shattered into a million pieces. That's when Lila's mother called. Ethan, it's been so long since you and Lila came over for dinner. Are you free sometime soon? Lila's mother never called him unless she wanted something. Probably her company was having money problems again, or she'd set her sights on another piece of land. Yes, I'll come over tomorrow night. Mom, but I think Lila's still mad at me. On the drive to the Moore house, Ethan was already making plans in his head. He'd been wrong about Ava. He admitted that, but now he was firmly in control of Sullivan Group. He didn't need Ava anymore. If Lila would just apologize a little, he'd be willing to make things right. He'd give Ava a big settlement and send her away. When Lila walked into the Moore house, Ethan was sitting on the sofa, her mother making small talk beside him. It had been so long since he'd seen her, and when she looked up at him, Ethan realized she'd changed. There was a brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She was more beautiful than ever. My mother's sharp voice cut through the room, full of blame. How dare you run away like that when you're engaged? Ethan's been so worried about you. Ethan was sitting calmly on the sofa, sipping his tea. I smiled softly and met my mother's gaze. I returned everything Ethan gave me, exactly as it was. I've already transferred all the money you spent on my upbringing and education to your bank account. I don't owe the Moores anything, and I don't owe Ethan anything. I looked past my mother and stared directly at Ethan. His calm expression was gone. His face had turned pale. So I'm not going to marry you, Ethan. No, I won't allow it. Ethan jumped up from the sofa, rushing over to me, his voice desperate. Layla, I know you're just saying this because you're angry. Ava's gone. I've already told my family we're going to start planning our wedding. Come back with me, and I'll introduce you to everyone. I promise. So he'd known all along about the way everyone ignored me, about Ava's provocations. He'd just chosen to look the other way, but it didn't matter anymore. When I'd first come to the city, feeling lost and alone, rejected by my own family, Ethan had been kind to me. That gratitude had been real. My love for him had been real. The pain and hurt had been real. But now, it was all over. Ethan, let's end this amicably. I turned to leave, but Ethan grabbed my wrist tightly. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Uncle Ethan, you're scaring my girlfriend. Liam pulled me into his arms protectively. His voice was still lazy, but his eyes were cold and dangerous. Ethan looked from Liam to me, his eyes blazing with anger. A cruel smile twisted his lips. So that's why you won't marry me, Layla. You found yourself a richer man. Before I could react, Liam punched him hard in the face. Ethan fell back onto the sofa, blood trickling from his mouth. Watch your mouth. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. My mother cowered in the corner, too scared to say a word. I'd paid back everything I owed her and the Moores. The thin, fragile bond between mother and daughter was finally broken. As Liam led me out the door, Ethan called out after us, his voice bitter. Layla, do you really think Liam's a good guy? He drove a girl to her death when he was in middle school. Go on. Ask him, he'll tell you. Liam went completely still. Then he turned around, his eyes wild with rage, and lunged at Ethan. I couldn't stop him. Liam rained blow after blow on Ethan, his fists connecting hard every time. By the time the ambulance arrived, Ethan was lying unconscious in a pool of blood. Before I was taken back by the Moores, I'd lived with Grandma in a picturesque canal town in southern China. Blue bricks and gray tiles, surrounded by mountains and water. Every day I'd go to school carrying the school bag Grandma had embroidered for me. After school, I'd play with my friends, wading in the stream and catching crabs. Liam had transferred to our school in 9th grade, a rich kid from the big city, completely out of place in our small town. He never seemed to fit in. Every day he'd either sleep at his desk or just stare out the window. He looked so dark and brooding all the time. I was the academic representative, and Liam never turned in his homework. Sometimes he wouldn't even write a single word. So I'd had to work up the courage to wake him up. Liam's head shot up from his desk. He was breathing heavily, his face pale, sweat dripping down his forehead. He looked confused and terrified. I'd never seen anything like it, and I stumbled back in shock. Liam. Are you okay? He ignored me, gave me a cold look, and put his head back down on his desk. But, you haven't turned in your homework yet. My voice was so quiet I could barely hear it myself. He didn't answer. When class was about to start, I went back to my seat. I took out a candy I'd been saving and left it on his desk, along with a handkerchief for him to wipe his sweat. The old lady next door had told me that's what happens when people have low blood sugar. Years later, after I'd moved to the city, I'd wake up screaming from nightmares, and I'd realize that hadn't been low blood sugar, that had been a nightmare. Only people who are really hurting have nightmares that bad. Maybe it was the candy and the handkerchief that had softened him. Liam started being nicer to me after that. When I came to collect his homework, he'd at least scribble a few answers so I wouldn't get in trouble. Then rumors started spreading around school That Liam had killed someone at his old school. That's why he'd had to transfer. The rumors got worse and worse. Everyone would whisper and stare when he walked by. I found him standing on the roof of the school, leaning against the railing. The wind was blowing hard, and he looked so fragile. Like he might blow away at any second. I called out to him, "Liam." The wind carried my voice away. He turned around and looked at me. "Do you want me to bring you some lunch?" After that, we became friends. He asked me once, why had I gone up to the roof that day? I told him. "The teacher told me to look out for the new student. Aren't you scared of me, after everything people are saying?" "No, I believe you." The rumors were ridiculous. Some people even said he'd eaten someone. I don't know why I trusted him so much. Maybe it was because even though he looked tough, he never picked on anyone weaker than him. Or because he always said sorry when he accidentally bumped into someone. Or because he'd quietly take out the classroom trash when no one was looking. But probably the real reason was simpler. I just knew. Someone with a face that beautiful LDn't be a bad person. Liam's injuries weren't serious. The doctor cleaned and bandaged them quickly. In the hospital hallway, he tugged on the hem of my shirt. His usually bright eyes were dull and uncertain. "Layla, don't you have anything to ask me?" I nodded. "Are you hungry?" Liam laughed suddenly, burying his face in my neck. Like a big, gentle dog. I felt warm tears on my skin. He was crying. "Layla, I'm starving." "Okay, let's go home and eat." It was an old, sad story. A boy had rejected a girl's confession, and the girl had jumped out of a 6th-floor window. A bright, lively girl, gone in an instant. Lying in a pool of blood. But what spread faster than the blood was the cruel gossip. No one cared about the real reason she'd jumped. That she'd suffered from severe depression her whole life. Because of her dysfunctional family who abused her relentlessly. She'd written in her diary over and over again that dead people don't feel pain anymore. Yes, the pain only stays with the living. Liam was just a 13-year-old boy. He'd tried to defend himself. To tell people the truth. But no one would listen. The image of that girl's pale, bloodied face haunted his dreams every night. All he'd said was a simple, polite sentence. "I'm sorry, but I don't feel the same way about you." Day and night. The accusations poured in. No one cared about the truth. They only believed what they wanted to believe. That the boy had gotten the girl pregnant and then abandoned her. That she'd killed herself because she had nowhere else to turn. That was the story they'd decided was true. In the end, Liam had broken down completely, and his family had sent him to our small town to recover. That night, I was curled up in Liam's chest, almost asleep, when I heard his soft voice, barely a whisper. "Layla, thank you for saving me." In those dark, hopeless days, Lila had been like the morning sun, warm and gentle, slowly seeping into his life, pulling him out of the darkness. When Lila had looked at him with those clear, trusting eyes and said, "I believe you," he'd found the courage to step back into the sunlight again. "Layla, I love you so much." I was half asleep, but I mumbled a reply. I love you too." Ethan asked to see me one last time. His injuries had been serious, and when he'd needed a blood transfusion, the doctors had discovered something. Ethan's blood type didn't match his parents'. A DNA test confirmed it. Ethan wasn't actually old Mr. Sullivan's son. Overnight, he'd gone from the heir to the Sullivan fortune to a disgraced bastard. Everyone was talking about it. I went to see him the day he was discharged from the hospital. Ethan had always been thin, but now he was just skin and bones. His face was pale, his hair messy. The confidence that had always defined him was gone, replaced by emptiness. "Why did you save me that day?" He was talking about the day at the Moore house. When Liam had lost control, I'd thrown myself between them and called an ambulance. I didn't want Liam to get into trouble. The last spark of hope in Ethan's eyes died. He smiled bitterly. I looked at him calmly and continued. "But I also didn't want you to get hurt. I really was grateful to you. Back when I first came to the city and felt so alone." When I finished speaking, Ethan turned his back to me stiffly. I saw a tear fall onto the white bedsheet. As I was leaving, he called out to me, his voice hoarse. "Layla, I'm sorry. I really did love you. Take care." Ethan, all my hard work paid off. My double-sided embroidery landscape of mountains and rivers won first prize in the competition. The day I got the trophy, I went back to the small town. I placed it on Grandma's grave. Grandma, you were right. I'm going to be okay. My overwhelming longing rides on the wind. I know she hears me. 2 months later, Liam took me to meet his parents. I was so nervous on the drive there. Do your parents care about things like family background? I knew how important those things were to wealthy families. Liam glanced at me and smiled. Miss Moore, you're a national award-winning embroidery artist, and you're worried you're not good enough. Relax, you're way out of my league. The meeting went much better than I could have imagined. Liam's father even cooked dinner himself to welcome me. Mrs. Carter looked at her son and rolled her eyes playfully. Go help your father in the kitchen. Don't bother us girls. When we were one in the living room, Mrs. Carter took my hand warmly. Layla, Liam has told us so much about you. He says you're the most wonderful girl in the world. Gentle, quiet, beautiful, and so strong. When he was in high school, he called me and said he was going to apply to the same college as you, and then he was going to ask you out. Her voice cracked a little, and tears filled her kind eyes. But then I got sick. I had to have major surgery on my stomach. He came home immediately to take care of me, and by the time I was better and he went back to find you, it was too late. He didn't want to interfere in your life. He cried for hours on you. Our engagement day, just sat on the balcony and cried. Said the girl he loved was marrying someone else. She wiped her tears and smiled softly. But it's okay. You found each other in the end. I would have blamed myself forever if you hadn't. Dinner was lovely. Mr. Carter kept urging me to eat more, and Mrs. Carter kept filling my plate. After dinner, Liam and I went for a walk. We held hands, walking along the path lined with ginkgo trees. I stopped in front of him and looked up. Liam, when did you first fall in love with me? He stuffed his hands in his pockets, pretending to think. Oh, that's a long story. I can't tell you all of it today. I brushed a leaf out of his hair and smiled. That's okay. Take your time. We have all the time in the world. Hey there, could you rate this story in the comments? Use a scale of 1 to 10. Please, I am begging you. It really means a lot to me. And if you like this kind of content, don't forget to hit follow.